Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to another Throwback Thursday. I kind of skipped the last 2 weeks, and in this video we are going all the way back to Final Fantasy X. This was one of the first PlayStation 2 games I ever played, and I absolutely fell in love with it. It's a little, uh,
Hey, it's this way.
it shows its age in certain aspects now, like the way that some of the lip syncing syncs up and things of that nature. But it's still a really good game. And I actually thought I was farther than this, but this is the HD remaster for the PlayStation 3. I don't have any way to capture footage off of my PlayStation 2. Well, actually, I do. I just didn't want to bust it out and set it up because I'm out of places to plug stuff in, and uh, I didn't feel like rearranging anything. So, plus this one looks slightly better than the original PlayStation 2 release, but this was a game that I'd played Final Fantasy games before. I played 7, 8, and 9, and uh, I don't 4 and 6, and I really liked 6, and I did like 7, but I would say maybe probably 10's my favorite, just because it was that first one that it really had the voice acting and the characters. I really enjoyed the characters. Waka, voiced by John DiMaggio, was just fun. Tidus could sometimes be a little whiny, but his interactions with Yuna were just so well written and powerful that even to this day there isn't a character interaction that impacted me as much as those two did. I mean, I'm not saying there isn't better character interactions, but the story of those two and the eventual blooming romance between them, and then just that gut punch at the end of the game just really, really hit me. I'm sure maybe to some degree it might also have to do with when I did finally play Final Fantasy X. I might have been an emotional wreck because I just had a son, but kids make you sensitive when they're born. I went from like being this hard-edged, didn't care about anything person to like this big pussy for a while, man. Like I watched an episode of House one time where a baby died, and I'm like, oh my god, that's so sad. And before I'm like, oh, that's sad, you know. But having kids changes you in that way. But yeah, the ending of this game was just a horrible, horrible gut punch. Luckily, though, being the dork that I am and was, I got the secret ending, so there was that little glimmer of hope. Then there was Final Fantasy X too, which I give them credit was an admirable attempt at trying to differentiate the game gameplay-wise from Final Fantasy X. But there was just some parts of that story that were so cringeworthy, so cringeworthy. I liked the continuation, being able to see where the characters had gone and what was going on with them. But there was that game didn't particularly grab me like 10 did. And then in this HD collection, there's I forget what it's called, but it's essentially like 10.3. It's not a game, it's like a animatic. There's just kind of still images, and it's narrated by two characters that are observing events, and it just pissed me off because 10 and 10.2 at the end of the day were mainly Tidus and Yuna's story. Um, it was such a well-written romance that you wanted these two to be together, and that little third part that they threw into that HD remaster just takes all of that and kind of shits all over it. I wasn't thrilled with it. It was just kind of, I felt like between that, what they did with Tidus and Yuna in that third part, and then the return of Sin, it just kind of made me feel like that the two games I played and accomplished nothing. Um, and it also kind of further reinforced that theory and feeling that I have that Square Enix really doesn't know how to make a good Final Fantasy game anymore. 12 being the last one that was really good. I really enjoyed 12 too. 13, like I said in previous times that I've mentioned it, I enjoyed the combat, but the story was just bleh. But 10 was the last one that I played that really hit it home on all fronts and was really good. I guess my issues with 12 was it just didn't. The story didn't quite grab me like 10 did. I enjoyed Balthier and Ash, and I guess to an extent. I can't remember the kid's name now. See, that's bad. I can't remember. I remember Vaughn. I can't remember the characters like I can in 10. But 10 just had, every character was interesting. You had Kamari, who was also voiced by John DiMaggio, who, at the time, for me, that was pretty cool, like, having this weird, big, scary cat dude with a horn. It was like a unicat. And he was like he was like borderline silent protagonist because he didn't really talk a lot, but he was still interesting with the whole thing with his history with the Ronzos and his kind of like outcast status because of his horn. And then you had Lulu, who was by far the most interesting looking black mage that's ever been in a Final Fantasy game. And that was kind of neat too because they even like later on as I got into like learning the behind the scenes stuff, the fact that she was designed that way had a lot to do with they wanted to show what the capabilities of the PlayStation 2 were, and that's why she was designed with all those belts on her dress and things like that. And it made for probably not a practical battle attire, but it was definitely interesting.
So you want to win the next tournament? Go out with a bang.
Then you had Oron, who was just badass. I mean, what he just walk around with a giant sword and cut shit up. They kind of hinted at his ultimate fate a couple times earlier in the story.
If I say what's our goal, you say
it made him sort of a tragic character, but he was still. I mean, I guess it was tragic in that. There's going to be a lot of spoilers in this, obviously, in that he was dead, but I mean, he accepted his fate, but he just had to complete what he had sworn to do first. Then you had Tidus and Waka and Riku. I already mentioned Tidus a little bit. Waka was kind of a breath of fresh air because he was just he was a little bit more lighthearted. And I think that's what this game did well, is it struck that nice balance between like the serious kind of stoic nature of like Final Fantasy 7 and 8 and a little bit more of the lighthearted tone that they had in Final Fantasy 9. None of your protagonists were really like these brooding, moody protagonists. I mean, Tidus was kind of whiny at times, but I mean, he wasn't like Cloud or Squall. But the story had some very heavy, serious implications as to what could happen to this world of Spira. And I think that kind of balanced nicely. If you would have had like a Cloud or Squall type of character in this game, I think it would have just drug it down and made it probably kind of like depressing.
Take a look around first.
Because Sin was a very real and prominent threat, more so than what I remember Sephiroth being. I mean, Sephiroth had a couple scenes before the end of the game, but I mean, really, outside of killing Aerith, he didn't really like pop up and do anything memorable.
Remember the prayer, right?
You trailed him in the temple, but I mean, he didn't.
I didn't know it in the first place, to tell the truth.
And he was talked about a lot, but I mean, Sin was there, you have numerous encounters with Sin, and you see the destruction that it can bring about when it destroys Kilika and things like that. And Sephiroth, while being a major villain, just didn't kind of have that big impact straight away. Obviously, I mean, he was going to destroy the planet with meteor, but I mean, he didn't have that feeling of the ever-present threat that Sin does, and I think that's kind of what makes it stand out a little bit more, is because you had the encounter where it's destroying, and the backstory where it's destroying Xanarkand at the beginning of the game. You have the encounter on the boat, the aforementioned Kilika scene where it destroys that village, which no fucks was given there. I mean, Square Enix did not pull any punches with that. They showed children and everything running away from the tidal wave, and that really hit it home that this was a force of nature that had no care. It did not discriminate. It did what it was supposed to do, and it just wiped out villages and civilizations and things like that. And that really hit home that it needed to be stopped. And that's something that they did really well with that character and that entity. I think all in all, though, there was a few awkward moments, but I think the fact that this was the first game I played that had a lot of voice acting. And keep in mind when I say that, I mean, I know there was games that came out before it and stuff like that that had voice acting, but I was out of gaming for a long time. The N64 being the last console I bought, and then the next console I got was the PlayStation 2, probably 2 or 3 years before. No, it might have been closer to when the PlayStation 3 came out. I didn't get a PlayStation 2 until 2006. Yeah, 2006.
Standing in that place.
Because my girlfriend at the time wanted to play Mortal Kombat. So we played some Mortal Kombat, but then I ended up getting Final Fantasy X. And that was the first big game that I played that had like these big production values and voice acting and things like that, outside of like grunts and groans and the stupid shit that Mario says in Mario 64. So I mean, it was a big new thing for me, and just the world was interesting. The areas that you go to, none of them are really. I mean, Kilika has that tropical village vibe, and so does Besaid. But then you get to like Jose and Macalania and Bevale, and it's completely different. And then you had the Xanarkand ruins and the Ronzo Mountain. It felt vast and expansive because the areas were different enough, and it was funny hearing myself the desert. I mean, nothing was. There was like an overall kind of tropical vibe to the whole deal, but you still had these areas that were different enough that it felt like a fully fleshed out and realized world that had different continents and people lived in, and things were. It was interesting and different enough to keep you motivated to see what was going on. Fuck the lightning planes. You know how many times I almost broke my controller trying to dodge all that lightning so I could get I think it's Lulu's ultimate weapon. Still a little sore about that. But all in all, I mean, it was just a game that really pulled me in at the time. And like I said, I mean, maybe a lot of it had to do with the impending birth and then eventual birth of my son. Made me a little bit more sensitive to the subject matter. But not that there's any children being born in this game, but I mean, I kind of like drew in on that relationship between Yuna and Tidus that I was heartbroken at the end when Tidus faded away and Yuna went to hug him and she kind of just fell through him and stuff. It was just it was heavy, and at that time, I mean, there was nothing that I had ever played that had like that heavy weight of emotion in it, and it was, to me, that was more impactful than the Aerith death in Final Fantasy VII because I I know a lot of, and man, I'm gonna get a lot of shit for this.
Take a nap.
I know a lot of people ship Cloud and Aerith, but my problem with Aerith was, to me, the only reason she had any interest in Cloud was because he reminded her so much of Zack, which, as we found out
You could at least
later on in the game, was probably because he thought he was Zack. Um, and it just kind of, I don't know, I always felt like Tifa and Cloud were a better pairing, but that was never really explored upon. Um, so flame away. I know there's people that are going to be upset about that, but
It's been nearly
that
a day already.
I'm not a Aerith Cloud person. But I don't know. It just didn't. I mean, it was sad because I mean she was a part of your group, but that the ending to this game was far more impactful to me because I mean I think too a lot of that has to do with there wasn't really a love story between Aerith and Cloud, whereas there was clearly a love story between Yuna and Tidus. And I think we've all felt that sense of, uh, we've all had that situation with someone where those feelings grow and you nurture them, and then to have that ripped away from you in some way, shape, or form, whether it be through a breakup or a move or whatever. Um,
Waka?
there was something there, I think, that just about everybody can relate to with Yuna and Tidus that really resonates with people. I know it resonated with me. It probably, it definitely still resonates with me. I, we've all had that one person that just utterly, for whatever reason, you just can't be with them, and it's soul crushing. And back
Something
then,
wrong?
I had that,
Someone who
and
hasn't
I still
accepted
have
the
that for the
trials.
same person.
Eh?
But
Well, apprentice
it's
summoner really.
something that you
There's a
eventually
room
deal
in
with
there
and
called the
get over.
Cloister
But I
of
mean,
Trials. Beyond is where
it
the apprentice
does
summoner
make it
prays.
easy to
If the
identify
prayer
with
is heard,
the
the
story
apprentice
that is
becomes a
presented here
fully-fledged summoner.
between
Remember?
those two, because
So someone is in there
it
somewhere
is
and they haven't
human
come back out. Right, I
and
got
it is something
The
that
day's already gone by.
is easy
Is it
and
particularly
believable and
dangerous
can
in there?
happen to anybody.
Sometimes, yes.
Obviously, nobody's going to go
Why
out
don't
and
you go
fight
in and
this
help?
giant,
There's already
weird,
guardians in there.
whale-looking sin monster,
Besides
but
his opinions.
there is somebody that you will
Hey, but what if something
eventually,
happens?
if you
What if the
haven't,
summoner dies?
fall in love with and
Like
have
I
that
care.
progression of feelings and that growing. I'm rambling, but
Maybe.
you
This wasn't
understand.
such a good idea
Plus, it
after all.
helped that Yuna was a fairly lovable character and likable. Um, she had probably one of the most interesting attires in the game because she was designed to be kind of like, she has like that girl next door quality. Like Lulu kind of has like that like exoticness to her. Ginormous boobs aside, but just like her facial features and the red eyes and her hair and the dress, though, she has that like kind of like mystical, exotic air about her. Whereas Yuna feels like the girl that you grew up next door to and uh, hung around with and went and had classes with throughout your time in school and everything like that. And her her style of dress, while sort of, I mean, it's exotic, but it has a little bit more Japanese flair to it than most of the other clothing choices in the game. And she has more of like a believable quality about her. So that makes it easy to identify with and enjoy a character like that. Tidus, like I said, I mean, he had his whiny moments, but for the most part, he was identifiable. He was kind of like an avatar for the character, more so in this game than probably off the top of my head any other protagonist in a Final Fantasy game, because he was thrust into this world that he didn't know. He was pulled out of his comfort zone by Sin destroying Xanarkin and then sucking him through that portal. So he was definitely out of his element. He was adjusting in the same way that the player was out of their element and adjusting to, you know, for us, we had new gameplay mechanics to adjust to, a new graphical style, a more in-depth, immersive, fully realized story. I mean, this is the first time in a Final Fantasy game we had voice acting. So, I mean, it was kind of like a big change for the player, too. So, going through all those, kind of like relearning how the game was played, especially with the sphere grid, instead of like your typical leveling up route. I kind of it was a very, I'm sure, conscious decision on Square Enix's part to write the character the way that they did, and it worked out well because as he learned things, we were also learning them. So it didn't feel the exposition didn't feel forced for the sake of the player, because our main character also had no idea what was going on. And that's a tricky slope in video games, because there's a lot of games where exposition feels very forced because you feel like your character's kind of supposed to be sitting there going, well, no shit, I already know this, but it has to be explained so that the player isn't lost and confused as to what's going on and things like that. And this was one of the first games that really did it pretty well. And even kind of poking, I feel like while it might not have been a conscious decision, it still kind of comes across as they're poking fun at all the amnesiac characters that have been present in games, which there's been a lot of them. So, I mean, it was kind of cool that they didn't just like have you play as this character that just like woke up on this island and had no idea what was going on. Um, from an amnesia perspective, like he really actually had no idea what the fuck was going on, and it, it, he his reactions to it were believable. He was skeptical of things, but he at the same time he was kind of accepting of some things. And I think anybody in that position would probably react not exactly the same as he did, but probably fairly close to that, because some things are familiar, like the prayer being the blitzball sign for victory and everything like that. There was things that clicked in his head that there were similarities between this strange new world that he was in and the world that he was used to. But all the other stuff was just so foreign and new to him.
Hey, it's
But
okay.
I think
Any summoners, apprentice summoners,
really
and their guardians can
the
enter.
last, I'm going to say third of the game, though,
It's a
is
tradition,
where
very important.
it kind of kicked it into high gear. You had
Someone
this
back
sense of
you?
urgency
Me,
and
I'm a guardian.
finality to it. And the
A
whole,
guardian?
there was a very sinking, weighty feeling from the ruins of Xanarkin onto the end of the game.
Summoners go on a
And when
pilgrimage
it's
to pray
revealed
to
that he's a
reclaim
dream
the
of the
spirit.
faith, he
Guardians protect them.
it's unacceptable to him,
The guardian's in there now.
as it is
One of
to
them's got a sure
not
fuse.
all, but I'm
Who
sure
knows
most
what the
players
others think?
were
Well,
a little stuck on
here
that,
we come this far.
and not wanting to believe that he
Might
would
as well go
disappear
all
at
the
the end
way.
of the game. But, they most Final Fantasy games do have that air of sadness to them at some point in the game and tragedy,
What are you
and
doing
this
here?
one
Didn't think we'd be able to handle it.
really was
No,
kind of
it's
tragic,
it's
just in how it presented everything, and just,
see, I
man,
told
that
you she
ending.
gets mad
I
easy.
still can't. To this day, I would say it's definitely my top five
Is
endings
the
of all
summoner
time,
alright?
because it was emotional and because it
Who
didn't come out of left
are
field.
you?
You knew it was coming, and you were sort of prepared for it. Like you knew what was going to happen, but you still weren't prepared for it, you know. Um, and in 2001 or whenever this game came out, that was a big thing, you know. But and the game did have some of its problems. Like I hated the blitzball and things like that. But all in all, this was a game that I thoroughly enjoyed, and I don't want to say I forgot that I had this HD remaster, but I'm definitely gonna work on finishing it. Um, there's some things that didn't age so well, like some of the cutscenes, while really good looking, some of the character models are kind of like strange. But and some of the animations are a little stiff nowadays, looking back at it. But this is still a really, really good game, and may actually pick it up when the HD remaster comes out for the PlayStation 4. I don't know. But we're going to wrap this video up here, and like always, guys, I want to thank you all for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Oh, and the heterochromia thing with her eyes was fucking awesome.